These are 10 books that are trending right now, but out of these 10, there's only 5 that are worth reading, and out of those 5, there's only one that I'd give a 5-star rating to. Recently, I've been trying to read more books that are popular among other readers. By doing this, I've been able to discover new stories and books that I liked, and for those that I didn't like, I've also been able to better understand why they are so hyped. In this video, I'll be talking about 5 popular books that I liked and 5 that I wouldn't really recommend. The first book that I would not recommend reading is The Wedding People by Allison S. Patch. So I thought this book was okay, not amazing, not terrible, but it was a little bit better than I expected going into it. I thought that it had a pretty realistic beginning, with the protagonist's home and life situation being something that probably a lot of people could relate to. I also liked some of the small touches in this one rather than the whole story. Generally, I liked how the author incorporated some small word choices and little details that really spoke to her own life and brought out her personality. I wish she had done this a little bit more though, because it does make you feel more connected to the person behind the story, the one that's actually writing it. But there were a few things that I did not like with this one. Namely, it was extremely dialogue heavy to the point where it was very noticeable. I also didn't like how the author had a tendency to spoil other books. I found that pretty inconsiderate to readers. Do not like when that happens in books. I also thought that the way things ended up and the way things went deviated from that realistic beginning that was set up in the start. And one thing about the main character that I didn't like was how selfish she was and how we didn't really see an arc with that. By the end, she felt just as selfish as she did in the beginning, and it was just an annoying trait to see in the main character. One other annoyance here was the amount of times that COVID was mentioned. It just got very annoying by the 15th time I saw it on the page. But one unique thing about this book actually was my reading of it, because I was able to read it while surrounded by wedding people. At my work, during the couple days that I was reading this, there were actually 2 weddings going on, and one of my coworkers' friends, he said actually verbatim the words, "Oh, those wedding people," even though I'm sure he's never heard about this book. So that made me respect the author for her accuracy in describing weddings, and the wedding guests there did feel very like an accurate portrayal. The book was very much so okay, with some good and some bad, but I wouldn't say that it's worth reading. So the next book that I'm going to be talking about here is one that is not worth reading, though it is a very, very popular one in the romantasy category. That is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. And this one I'd give a 2.5 out of 5. This is one that by finally reading it, I can understand why it became so popular. I can clearly see how the author was drawing from previously successful works like The Hunger Games, Throne of Glass, even Divergent here in some scenes especially, that it makes me understand why people love it so much. Since the author is taking from these ideas that are already successful and have already worked and making them her own, threading them into her own world, you can see why it's become such a popular phenomenon. But if I'm being honest, this one was just kind of cringe. Some of the characters felt unnecessary, some of the details about certain characters felt unnecessary and forced. And another big thing with this book was the lewdness here, was the explicitness in a lot of the scenes that just got really annoying and really overdone. But I will give the author some credit here and say that the ending made one of the characters' decisions and actions a lot more understandable in a logical way, because it was revealed that he had some previous experience with somebody else that informed his love and his decisions. And the realistic and logical sense of his love is an important part of a romance novel where it does feel coherent here. But yeah, this one was just too cringe for me to recommend it and say it's worth reading. Then there is The 3 Lives of Kate K by Kate Fagan. So this book wasn't terrible or anything like that. It was just pretty mid. Like, the thing that bothered me most with it was that it logically did not make any sense to me. The inciting incident, the main thing that drove the whole story, just wasn't grand enough. It wasn't on that large of a scale to justify the rest of the book. I did think that the small details there were done well and it made the protagonist more relatable and more fleshed out. But another thing I didn't like with this one was the book within the book. Man, that actually annoys me a lot of the time, and this one it was just super annoying as well. Perspectives here were too numerous, felt like a lot for the author to juggle, especially in the beginning. And yeah, overall, I think the general idea and some of the characterization was good, but some of the things that happen and the way they happen, the reason as to why they happen, just wasn't chosen well. It needed more internal logic here for this book to succeed. Now onto a thriller here that I'm going to give a 3 out of 5, and I'm not going to recommend this one. It is Not Quite Dead Yet by Holly Jackson. And this is just a random popular thriller that I decided to read for some reason, which did have an interesting premise there. I thought that the culprit was unexpected and that it was logical enough, and I liked the author's courage with the ending. That is definitely a strong point of this novel here. But it just didn't feel that thrilling. It also didn't feel like it dove deep enough into an exploration of the broader topics that could have been discussed with a premise like here. It didn't have that existentialism that could have existed here, and it didn't have more of the general aspects behind the reason as to why someone would commit this kind of a crime. It was decent enough for some lazy entertainment, but it just didn't feel impactful enough, and I felt like maybe it could have if the author just dove in a little bit more. The last one on the not worth it list here is The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. And this one I'm going to give a 2.5 out of 5. So this book was written through letters, which is something that I personally do not like. It's one of the main reasons I don't like Dracula. Like, that format is just not for me. But I also didn't find the main character likable or great in any sense. And I also didn't like the insertion of real famous people in the story. That was super annoying. The amount of references to other books just constantly throughout the novel didn't feel genuine. At a certain point, it just felt like the author was saying, I've read this book, low-key trying to flex on us, which is annoying and low-key what I'm doing with this channel, but I mean, I'm not pretending to do anything else, at least. With this book, I wasn't intrigued by the book when reading it. I didn't feel like it was necessary to uncover a mystery or to get to the bottom of it or to learn more about the main character there. Also felt like the author added too many unnecessary subplots and deviated from a concrete focus where that might have made the book a little bit better. One thing though that I did like and I did appreciate was how one of the relationships that I thought was the best and really well done was conducted via email. This kind of just spoke to that point and proved that point that it wasn't just about the letter format, it was about the correspondence itself. And I thought that was a cool thing that helped drive that home. But overall, the book was okay. It's not a bad book, but just not great. But then when I turn to the books that I would recommend, there is another book with a similar main character, like same kind of type of character, similar storyline there that I thought was worth reading. And this is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This one I'd give a 3.5 out of 5 stars. So this is a book that has an interesting concept, and it also has this cool side character that adds the uniqueness of the book there and the world and the story. This octopus character was something that you don't see a lot in other books, and I thought that that was a refreshing take. Though when I started reading this book, I did think that it would be more focused on him and on his life, so I was slightly let down by that, but not by too much. I also thought that the relationship between some characters felt a little bit forced, like with the main guy and his new girl there. I was just like, a little bit unnecessary for the story, but it was fine. One fun thing though about this book was figuring out the twist, like the little mystery there right before it was revealed. So as a reader, I thought that was a cool experience for me to have, because I just was like, oh wait, this is gonna happen, and then it happened. So I do have a fond impression of the book because of that as well. And yeah, overall, it's not my favorite book, but it does have a lot of merit here. I think it handled the storyline of an older woman better than The Correspondent. And yeah, I think it's definitely worth reading and worth making a judgment by oneself. Then we're on to the super hyped autobiography by the Nickelodeon star Jeanette McCurdy, and that is I'm Glad My Mom Died. This one I'd give a 3.5 out of 5, and I would recommend that you guys read it. So this was a book that was actually better than I thought it would be going into it. I didn't have the greatest expectations for it, but I think like coming away from it, I came out with the thought that it was an important book because it helped you understand the reality of the life of a child star. I also found that the author's honesty throughout was commendable. She was able to not only talk about her life and the problems with others, but also address her own flaws. The writing here was not the best. It is very obvious that it's her first book and it's not super polished, but the fact that it was her telling her own story in her own words gave it this level of authenticity that outweighed the, things that weren't the best, the lack of polish with the writing, so it made up for it there. I also thought that the author here was good at making readers understand the characters and the situations going on in the memoir. So yes, just don't go into this one expecting a literary masterpiece. Go into it expecting to gain a better understanding of someone's true life, of the kind of life that she and others in her position sort of lived, and you will find it worth reading. Next, coming on to one that surprised me by how much I enjoyed it and how much it lived up to the hype. That is Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaghy. I hope I'm saying that right, sorry. And yeah, this one I'd give a 4 out of 5. So it's a good book that I'm happy that I read. The setting was extremely unique and well written. Though in the beginning, I didn't actually like it that much. I thought, oh, maybe this is just a gimmick. But by the end, I did find myself loving it, and it did feel intentional and genuine there. Yeah, the relationship between two characters was something that I didn't really like, and I felt like didn't make too much logical sense when you're thinking of the reason as to why the character appeared in the first place, but it was okay. The story itself was interesting, and the mystery was engaging. The author also logically wrote here the one thing that made sense to happen for the whole situation to have occurred, so she was like smart with her planning out there. And yeah, I think the ending here though is what truly pushed it from a 3.5 solid good book to a 4 for me, because it showed that the author wasn't afraid to write the better ending, to write the ending that was just in my opinion, was a good ending, well written, rather than the ending that might have appeased more people. And yeah, the family here was also a really nice set of characters. I wish we saw a little bit more from the kids, but what we did see was great. And yeah, I thought that in that sense, it was a cool look into growing up and needing to say goodbye and just change. So yeah, I do recommend reading this one. Then we have a classic book that was written long before the others that I mentioned in this video, and it truly speaks to how it lasted the test of time and to still be spiking the interest of readers this year. And that is East of Eden by John Steinbeck, and this is a 5 out of 5 for me, and I really recommend that you guys read this one. So this is more than a story about two brothers in the Salinas Valley that borrows from the Bible. It is a story with true heart. It's not just another great book that Steinbeck wrote. It is, in my opinion, the book that took the most from his life personally. And that personality just imbued the already great story with a level of authenticity that took it to another level. And as a reader, that's one of my favorite things to see in a book, and it was executed perfectly in East of Eden here. Steinbeck also proves his creative genius here with his interpretation of the story of Cain and Abel in a way that makes you both forget and remember that he is borrowing from this already popular tale. At certain points it feels fresh and new, so readers don't think that they're just hearing something they've heard before. But then at other points, the similarity is very clear, so that you're reminded that stories are being retold, that history repeats itself. And Steinbeck knows when to apply certain literary tactics and characterization to do both at important times in the novel, at the perfect times in the novel. Then we come to the characters here that you can't help but feel connected to, because you can tell that he's put so much authenticity of real people that he's seen in his lives and the story of Cain and Abel already. So you just feel super connected to the characters here. Then you have the atmosphere that Steinbeck is drawing from, where he truly grew up. The streets where his family home was, the bed that he was born in was literally in the town where this is set. And that is the only setting that could make this possible, that could make this story possible, that could make this a biblical beginning, is his hometown of Salinas. It is the only environment that makes him stretch back to his youth and dig up the imaginative genius that is required for this novel, the creativity of a child so necessary to the execution here. And me personally, I was so lucky to have actually read this book with the view of the mountains of the Salinas Valley in the distance, and that just made this such an incredible experience for me, and I feel so lucky to have seen his childhood home during the week when I was reading this, around the time. For me, it was so amazing to be among these stories he created out of the air and out of the people and out of the streets where he lived and brought onto the page. So yeah, just an amazing experience that only served to enhance my reading of this amazing novel. Finally, we have the book that I saw everywhere for the past couple years and finally convinced myself to read. That is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And this one I'm going to give a 3.5 out of 5 here. And I do recommend that you read it, because it was a decent book that was better written than I thought going in. The general idea of following a celebrity was cool and an interesting concept, and it was cool to have this look into the life behind a star. Even though it was fictionalized, you could tell that there were some authentic parts to it there. But I will say the main character interviewer here was super annoying, and the framing just took away from the story here in my perspective, and I feel like it could have been done better without this annoying cringe interviewer. Another thing that annoyed me here was not about the book itself, but it was about the popularity and the categorization of the book that actually worked to spoil a major twist here. So you already kind of know that going into it what is going to happen, which was not the best. Also, in general, the foreshadowing that the author was trying to do here might as well be called for brightening for how obvious it was in some cases. So maybe just tone it down, don't make it that apparent. I can also very clearly see how the author was drawing from another work, Valley of the Dolls, the most interesting character there in my opinion, how she drew from her story and just put that into Evelyn Hugo's here. But yeah, overall, this book is not one that I personally loved, but I can understand why it's so popular. I can say that, it was well written, well done, even though it had some things I disliked. And yeah, I would say that it's worth reading. So yeah, these were all my personal opinions. Feel free to disagree on, I'm sure you guys will disagree on a lot, if not all of my takes here. And yeah, even the books that I didn't love, I would still encourage you to read them anyways and make the final decision for yourself. This is just a little bit of guidance, but at the end of the day, obviously, make your own decisions. And I don't want to stop you from reading any of the books that I thought weren't the best. But yeah, I'll see you in the next one.